fine. Well, but you'll have to let me say that I think that that's a slight waste of what could obviously be, in your case, very valuable time. I mean, I don't want you to go away with the impression that I'm just a vulgar materialist. I mean, I do know that humans are also so made, even though we are an evolved species whose closest cousins are chimpanzees. It's not enough for us just to have enough to eat and so forth, and we know how to think a lot of the time. We know how to laugh, and we know we're going to die, which gives us a lot to think about. And we have a need for what I would call the transcendent, or one could also say the numinous,
yes,
even the ecstatic, and it comes out in love and music, poetry, landscape, other...
Well, talk about that.
I wouldn't trust anyone who didn't respond to things of that sort, but I think the cultural task is to separate those impulses and those needs and desires from the supernatural and above all from the superstitious.
Well, could you talk about these two words that you just used, transcendent and numinous?
Yes.
Because those are two words that, quite honestly, are favorite words of mine, and I just want to know how you're using those terms and what you mean by them.
Well, this would probably be very embarrassing to anyone who knew me, but I'll say it anyway. I mean, there are times when I can't compose or play music, for example. I'm not that fortunate. But I can write, and I can talk, and sometimes when I'm doing either of these things, I realize that I've written a sentence or I've uttered a thought that I didn't absolutely know I had in me,
yes,
until I saw it on the page or heard myself saying it. There was a sort of a sense it wasn't all done by hand.
Sort of a gift.
That is, to me, that's the nearest I'm going to get to being an artist, which is the occupation I'd most like to have, and the one that last I'm the most denied. But I think everybody has had the experience at some point, tending to be usually towards the end of the day, when they feel that there's more to life than just matter. But I think it's very important to keep that under control and not to hand it over to be exploited by priests and shamans and rabbis and other riffraff.
I think that might be a religious impulse that you're talking about.
Well, no, I think it's absolutely not, you see. I think it's a human one. I think it's part of the melancholy that we have, which we know that happiness is fleeting. We know that life is brief, but we know that nonetheless life can be savored, and that happiness, even of the ecstatic kind, is available to us. But we know that our life is essentially tragic as well. Mm-hmm. I'm absolutely not for handing over that very important department of our psyche to those who say, well, why didn't you say so before? I have a solution for you. God has a plan with you in mind. I'm absolutely sure I have no time to waste on this planet being told what to do by those who think that God has given them instruction.
I don't think necessarily it has to be, those terms have to be attached to, quote, God. But, for example, I think a religious impulse is when you're just all of a sudden filled with a sense of thankfulness for something beautiful or for someone, or perhaps use the word numinous. You're struck with something, with some sense that there's something beyond you that you're in touch with all of a sudden. And that can be, it's a human phenomenon.
But let me give you an instance in my own case. I wrote a short book about the Parthenon, and the sculpture of the Parthenon, and the history of the building and so forth. And without that building, I would feel rather lost. If it was to be destroyed, for instance, I would feel that something really terrible had happened to the human species. But I'm able to appreciate the various symmetries and magnificences of the Greek style without at all caring about the cult of Pallas Athena, in whose honor, the goddess in whose honor the building was erected, yes, or the Eleusinian mysteries that were celebrated there, or Athenian imperialism. In general, all that's as dead as Christianity will one day be. It's a big cultural task for me to separate the cultural achievement that religion laid claim to from the claims of religion itself. And that's the job I feel myself embarked upon. No one's going to deny the role of religion in, for example, well, certainly architecture, as I've already said, but in devotional painting, actually, I like that the least. But in music, even though Verdi was, it turns out, not a believer, he could produce under that stimulus something about poetry, the poetry of John Donne or George Herbert, strikes me as having been produced by people who probably really believe what they were saying, and I have to be impressed.
Let me ask you just one final question. You've been so terrific to give us this much time, and I love your mind, I've got to say.
Believe me.
One last question. You write, literature, not scripture, sustains the mind and the soul. I'm a lit major before I was a theology major, so I appreciated that. And you use the word soul there as metaphor. What is a soul for you?
Well, it's the what you might call the X factor. I don't have a satisfactory term for it, but it's what I mean by the element of us that isn't entirely materialistic, the numinous, the transcendent, the innocence of children. Even though we know from Freud that childhood isn't as innocent as all that, there is still such a thing, it seems to me. The existence of love, which is likewise unquantifiable, but anyone would be a fool who said it wasn't a powerful force. And so forth. I don't think I can say that the soul was immortal, or at least not immortal in individuals, but it may be immortal as an aspect of the human personality.
Yeah.
And
I wouldn't want to argue with you.
When I talk about what literature nourishes, it would be silly of me, I feel, or reductionist to say it only nourishes the brain.
I wouldn't want to argue with you about the, immortality of the soul and so forth and so on, but I love what you said. And were I back in a church again, I would love to have you in my church because you're so eloquent, and I believe that some of your impulses, and excuse me for saying so, are religious in the way I am religious, and I relate very much to your sense of, as you say, the transcendent, the numinous. What love is about is something that you can't quantify. I might call that, a kind of spiritual realm. You may call it something else, but we agree with a lot of our thinking, I think, Christopher. And I really appreciate this conversation.
Well, I'm touched that you say, some people have also said to me that I've missed my vocation. But I actually don't think that I have. I would not be able to be this way if I was wearing robes or claiming authority that was other than human. So I think I would not be the same person if I was a person of faith. And that's a distinction that matters to me very much.
Well, you have your role, and it's a valuable one. So thank you for what you give to us.
Well, thank you for asking. It was very good of you to be my hostess.